Welcome back to Docket 360. I am your host D, and today I present you with 3 paranormal stories. Enjoy. Dying was one of the more important things that has happened to me in my life. It's right up there alongside my son being born and meeting my future wife for the first time. I say it's important because besides the obvious, I came away with a completely different outlook on life. Everyday worries and concerns seem to not matter so much anymore. I didn't start ignoring my responsibilities and telling my boss to stick his job, although that would have been nice. But I just came at my problems at a completely different angle. Nothing bothers me as much anymore, as I know all of this is temporary. There are many ways one can leave this world, some enormously more painful than others. For me, death came in the form of an inexperienced young driver who on one autumn morning thought his accelerator was his brake. I still remember that moment he hit me. Everything slowed down. Birds seemed to hang in the air for what felt like minutes. People who were walking casually on the pavement seemed to freeze mid-step. Looking down, I could see the tip of the car's bonnet against the side of my knee, then snap. I was present long enough just to watch my legs splinter in slow motion before complete darkness wiped me out of the scene. One of the last things I heard was a woman screaming in a car horn. Funny enough, I remember thinking, "Too late for the horn now, you asshole," as my senses faded. I know people often mention the out-of-body experience of hovering over your own body in a bright light and tunnel, but for me it was a little different. When consciousness slowly came back, it felt like I was just waking up out of a nap. The only difference was instead of waking up in my bed, I was hovering in space. Total darkness surrounded me. I couldn't see the stars, but before me was the entire planet Earth on its slow rotation. Some people seem to think that after you die, it's like this veil is lifted and suddenly you are aware of everything and anything. The meaning of life, what God looks like, what your purpose was. Not for me. I still felt like me. Nothing had changed with my mind in this aspect. It was just me floating in space looking at the Earth. After a moment, I began to realize I wasn't breathing. Not only wasn't I breathing, but I felt no need to take in a breath. I just felt comfortable. Looking down at my body, I was relieved to see everything seemed to be accounted for, even my jeans and Converse trainers. Impatience grew as I dangled there, and before I could open my mouth, I heard my own voice all around me ask, "What now?" This was another shock. I had spoken without opening my mouth. My thoughts had literal volume here. "Okay, that's weird," it said again. Just then I had this very strong sense that someone was behind me out here. I looked down at my body again. "It's okay, how do I move?" My voice bellowed all around me in stereo. But as the question was in the process of being asked, I could feel myself rotating 180 degrees where I came face to face with my grandfather. Okay, I thought. This is more like the typical death experience. I know it sounds like I was treating the whole situation rather casually, but what I realized when I came back is it was because all the sense of fear had been eliminated, so that all that was left was pure curiosity. My grandfather, who had died 10 years prior, looked how I remembered, but unlike me, he didn't seem to have a body. All I remember was his face, just seemed to materialize in the focus, begin to fade a little, and then slid back into focus again. It was trippy, to say the least. "Granddad," I thought at him. He smiled in acknowledgement, and communication began with him. Now, unlike me, his voice didn't seem to surround us every time he spoke, but I just felt it. His thoughts were suddenly my thoughts too. I didn't hear words. I saw what he saw in his mind's eye. He made me realize I had died, and everything was going to be fine. He showed me images of where he had come from and where I soon would go. It was then I began to realize what we are, why we are here. I began to feel waves of emotion hit me like electricity. The only way I can describe it is if you ever fell in love with someone for the first time, or your first crush, the first time you were lovesick, but multiplied so many times over. Raw energy of love blasting into me through my grandfather. That feeling, that energy is where we come from. Answers to curiosity began to fill my mind. Humans are so much more than what we think we are. Each and every person is an energy being, an everlasting force that never stops growing. You quite literally go on forever, forever growing, forever learning. Earth is literally a school for us, just one step of many that you will take with you as your soul energy grows. We are all gods in our own right. I can't stress how important every single life is. After a few minutes of absorbing this information, I began to feel strange. I had been feeling an odd pulling sensation to go with my granddad, but then suddenly it was replaced with a heavy feeling. My movements were becoming extremely sluggish, and a look of curiosity was on my grandfather's face. I found my body turning away from him now and back to the earth. As I watched our world spin, I began to see what looked like shooting stars fly across the globe, then disappear under the clouds. After another beat, I became aware that these were not stars at all. They were souls arriving to begin their lessons. I felt this sudden feeling of envy. I wanted to go with them, to go back. As I felt this, everything around me began to pulse with light. Blinding flashes, and my body began to feel like it was in quicksand. I'm going back, my voice echoed, and the last thought that my grandfather put into my head was my wife and son. It filled me with so much emotion that I knew instantly that he knew who they were, what they looked like, and what they were like as people. He had died before I even met my wife, so this was a startling revelation. People who pass on know everything that's happening in real time. The final blinding flash sent pain shooting through me and I screamed. I felt so much pain in my chest that I couldn't feel anything coming from my crushed leg. "Nathan, are you with us?" shouted a young woman's voice. "It's okay, I have a pulse," shouted a young man. When the light faded, I was surprised to find myself inside an ambulance, staring at the ceiling. A man with shock paddles stood nearby, and a woman was shining light into my eyes. I took her hand in mine. I was crying, but not out of fear or pain. I was so glad to be back with the humans again. I have always been a believer in ghosts, demons, and the paranormal in general, but never really had any paranormal experiences in my life. Though they intrigue me, they also terrify me, and I like to put up a wall to block all that kind of stuff out, because I'm scared of what will happen if I openly invite the paranormal into my life. Despite that, I've always loved hearing other people's experiences. There's only been one time in my life where I experienced anything paranormal. It was 8 years ago and I was 15, and for the context, I'm a girl. My sister and I were both really into horror movies and ghost shows, so one day, she decided to make a homemade Ouija board on a piece of printer paper. She simply looked up a Ouija board online and wrote it down on the paper. She was 13 at the time, and 3 neighborhood kids were over at our house as well. She got a little shot glass to use as a planchette and started playing with the board with the other kids, without my knowledge. She came to find me when the board was apparently working and told me I had to come try it. I was super nervous because I was, and still am, of the belief that Ouija boards are really dangerous. But at the same time, I was so intrigued that I couldn't help myself but try it just once. At first, we were all in a bit of disbelief when the shot glass moved across the paper. We all kind of laughed and accused each other of being the ones who moved it. But eventually we realized that it was definitely moving on its own. We started asking the basic questions. Is anyone there? Yes. What is your name? Martha. One of the neighbor boys decided to joke around and ask it what color underwear my brother was wearing. It spelled out blue stripes. My sister then ran into my brother's room and pulled his pants down to check, and it was right. He was wearing blue striped underwear. We also checked what color underwear each person in the room was wearing and would have that person stop touching the shot glass. So we knew they weren't the ones moving it. And it said the right color each time, and we started believing it a bit more now. My sister asked if Martha lived in our house. It spelled out no. I forget the question we asked to come to this conclusion, but somehow we got her to admit to following us home from school from our bus stop. We also asked her to show a sign that she was really there and began hearing knocking sounds and such. We asked how Martha died and she told us crash. We assumed it meant car crash. She then started spelling things out without being questioned. She spelled family. We asked who her family was. She spelled out John's husband, and then Edward, son 8, and finally Carol, daughter 5. Then she said angry. We asked why she was angry. She said husband. We asked why she was mad at the husband, and she replied, bisexual whore. At that young age, we all found this pretty hilarious and started laughing. I challenged the ghost by calling her a bitch. And then she spelled out bitch right back at me, which creeped me out. We asked to talk to John, the husband. He also told us his wife was angry and told us his profession. We kind of got the idea his family had died in a car crash, and maybe the ghost of the wife realized in the afterlife that her husband had secretly been a bisexual prostitute while they were living. We asked a few more personal questions that each person would only know about themselves to make sure one person wasn't moving the shot glass and fooling everyone. Eventually we stopped, and the neighbors went home. Later that night, my sister and I tried it by ourselves. The shot glass would move slightly, but I think just 2 kids wasn't enough energy to move it far, so we gave up. She saved the piece of paper, but I worried about her getting obsessed with it, and I secretly cut it up and buried it in the woods near our house, which she was very pissed about. We looked up obituaries for our town and were creeped out to find a family of 4 with the same names had died in a car crash on the street near our home. No one believes us when we tell this story, but everyone who was there that day knows it was real. It must have been around 1986 or 87. I was around 8 or 9 at the time. My family and I lived in a small town in northern Manitoba. There was one night I awoke to feelings in my room. There was a coat hanger that was hanging on my closet doorknob. It started to float towards me, as if carried by an invisible person. Obviously this terrified me, to which I quickly closed my eyes and hid under my covers. It felt as if someone was in my room, greatly amused by my terror. I would peek out of my covers and see that the hanger was back on the closet door. This would make me feel a sense of relief and that it was all in my head. Then it would happen again. I called out for my dad. He came to my room. I tried to explain the situation in an embarrassed, I know there's no such things as ghosts kind of way. Anyway, he laid me in my bed, half paying attention, half asleep. I would peek over him to see if the hanger would still move, and it did. I eventually fell asleep. A few months later, I had to share a room with my 2 brothers. They shared a double and I had a single facing the doorway. I awoke late at night. My parents never left any lights on, so I knew they were asleep for the night and it had been way too late. My older brother was standing in the doorway watching me. I asked him why he was up. There was no response. That's when I realized there was no detail, and that the figure was darker than the room itself. I got that chilled feeling that's hard to remember now as a grown man, but it scared me to the bone. It moved to the end of my bed. My mind raced trying to comprehend what I was looking at. All I know was that I was terrified, and that somehow I knew it was happy it was having this effect. Once again, I used my incredibly protective blanket to hide under, too scared to peek. Who knows how long I stayed awake under there waiting for something to grab me. I'm 38 now, and I have not experienced anything like this again. We only lived in the house for a year, and the rest of my family never had any of the same situations or experiences that I had. I can only tell you that these 2 scenes I've described are burned into my memory. I'm not into the paranormal, nor do I watch any of the many shows on television. The only other strange thing that I can relate to this is that streetlights at night have the tendency to turn off when I walk under them, since that happened. Even now, when I drive under them at night, they turn off. They turn off enough times that I can't believe it's merely a coincidence. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe, and please share it with your friends. If you have content you'd like to see in a future video, please send it over to docket360@gmail.com. You can also DM me on Twitter @docket360. And for now, have a nice night.